So welcome to Conversations That Matter. Today we're with Shaun Monson, and we're going to talk about your film Earthlings, and maybe some other stuff.
Sure.
So first of all, I saw the film last week. It was by myself in a hotel room. And
let me just interject for a second. Did you get through the whole thing in one sitting, or did you have to
I
take
did.
it in steps?
Well, no, I did. I got through. I did. I got through the whole thing in one setting. I played it straight through. I think I did stop it to use the bathroom or something.
Right.
But the strange thing was, I was eating dinner while doing this.
Wow.
But subconsciously, I ordered a vegetarian meal.
Oh.
And
so you didn't feel too guilty.
So it
then?
wasn't too guilty, and I guess I had known. I don't know, but yes, I did sit through the whole thing, and there was pauses while I was eating because I was in awe.
Right.
But I did get through my food, and then I moved around a lot. I had it was on my laptop, so it was moving around. But very intense film. I can still see the images today and still feel the weight that the film carries.
Right.
And well, first of all, what's the story? What's the story behind it? What inspired the film? Where did it start?
Well, let's see. I was raised like most. I suppose I'm raised in America. I was raised like most American families on a meat and dairy diet, and I saw footage in the early 90s of pigs being slaughtered, and I was appalled, as most people are, I think, when they see slaughter of animals, which is interesting. We actually touch on this in the new film about being carnivores, and if humankind is really carnivorous or not, because the carnivorous animal, and humans are animals, of course, but the carnivorous animal sort of licks their chops when they see blood and suffering. It's like a shark in the water when they see, the panic. They sort of, it's almost like a lust that is aroused in some way. And the lion with the weak prey, And yet, in contrast to that, the human usually is repelled by blood and bloodletting. We don't like to see it.
Right.
And yet we boast that we're carnivorous, So the footage is usually kept hidden. It's hard to come by. You don't see it. Actually, you can go online now and see footage pretty easily, but in the 90s, when I was, the only people that were doing this sort of thing were animal welfare groups, whether it was the Humane Society, PETA, of course, which is known for being a little bit more radical, but there's lots of groups all over the world that were showing abuses to animals. And so I remember seeing footage and being so moved by it that I didn't want to contribute to it anymore. I wanted to become a vegetarian, and I did. And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if there was a sort of tool that existed? And I began looking for any film that existed out there. And there were some films out there that have been around. But most of the groups would have a video that dealt with a particular issue. Let's say it was fur or circuses or whatever the cause may be. And there was none that I knew of that sort of had the whole thing in one, the whole thing in one dose. And so as I did my research, I thought, well, there's pretty much 5 areas. These are the 5 areas that humankind uses animals for economic purposes. And it was the pet industry, food, of course, clothing, entertainment, and scientific research. Right. So these were the 5 categories I just put it all into. And then I was a bit overwhelmed. I thought, well, who am I to sort of do something like this? I don't know anything, but it nagged at me so much that I had to assemble something. So I began gathering footage. I started because the pet section is the first section of the film, I began going out on what's called a ride-along with animal control officers. I started in South Central LA and in Long Beach, and I began to just kind of go right along. And one of the big switches, this was early on, I didn't really have the whole thing mapped out yet, but they pick up all these dead animals, and we euthanize a lot of animals in this country. I'm not sure what the statistic is today, but I think it's about 30,000 dogs and cats per day just in America, which if you were to make a pile of 30,000 animal corpses, it's about 3 stories high. And this is a daily occurrence in just in America. And again, that number might be higher or lower right now, but that's what I heard. And so what happens is when they're euthanizing, they put them in this refrigerated room, a room about this size. And when I looked in the room and saw all these, and these are domestic animals, these are mostly dogs and cats. Some roadkill you'd see in there, it might be a rabbit or a coyote or a possum, but mostly dogs and cats that have been euthanized. And it was something about seeing the domestic animal in a refrigerated room, and that was the switch. It was like a fridge, and it made me think of meat. So I went from dogs and cats to cows and pigs and chickens right away, even though there were no cows or pigs or chickens in that room, but it was about the fridge that did it. Right. And that's when I realized it had to be
covering more than just...
Yeah, and so it went from pets to food, and it just began to spread from there.
Yeah, I guess that was my next question. Was there a specific event that triggered, well, I guess what triggered the first act of going out and filming
with the animal control officer? Well, no, I'd read that statistic that I just mentioned, and I was puzzled by that because everybody usually loves their dogs and cats, and I just thought, well, what if it started as a PSA, a public service announcement about spaying and neutering your pet? Just please, spay and neuter. And so that's why I went out with we call them ACOs, animal control officers. I went out with the ACOs, and then it was, of course, seeing that refrigerated room that was the leap from pets to food, and then there was another leap from food to clothing, another leap from clothing to entertainment, which is like circuses, zoos, rodeos, bullfighting, worldwide, not just here. Yeah. And then, of course, animal research, which is one of the toughest subjects because the animals are often kept alive. Yeah. Even in slaughter, in food, they're at least slaughtered.
Yeah, those were some of the most disturbing images.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And some of it's old. It's so hard to get this footage. Yeah. Even to this day, it's incredibly hard. That's quite interesting to me. It's like Fort Knox, some of these places. They're doing tests on rats or whatever, beagles. Why is that? That's interesting. In fact, in 2005, they enacted a law called the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. And those first two words are key: animal enterprise. Any sort of animal enterprise that profits from the use of animals in whatever one of these areas, mostly food. But if a former employee or a journalist or a filmmaker or someone was to get inside and document the goings-on in there, and if that footage was to be released, and if the company, the enterprise, could show a loss of profit, and that's the wording in the actual bill, loss of profit, then the filmmaker, the whistleblower, the journalist can be imprisoned. And that was passed about 7 years ago. Yeah. And they call it a terrorism act, so it's considered an act of terrorism. What? Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And I think it was the Gazette, or it was a newspaper that said it's a curious terrorist organization that's never killed anybody before. And post 9/11, that term, within 5 years of that event, as today still, it still reverberates. So yeah, the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. So.
And it's if anything, it's out there to save lives. Then too.
Yeah, ultimately.
It's just insane every day.
And even today, I forget the latest. We'd have to look them up, but there's bills being passed in each state right now. I think maybe it's passed in 3 states. I'm not sure. 3. Where it is against the law to film inside.
Wow. With that said, during the making of the film, probably more so after, but did you run into, did you make enemies and resistance? And then on the reverse, did you have people trying to help you out?
Well, people certainly helped. I have to thank most of those animal groups, and there's a number of them, worthy groups. One thing I discovered is that you could have a Chihuahua rescue organization in some town, and then you could have the Humane Society, or IFAW, which is the International Fund for Animal Welfare. You could have these, big groups, well-funded groups and smaller groups. There's a group here in LA called LCA, Last Chance for Animals, and I found that different groups sometimes specialize, it seemed, in certain issues. So as I recall, LCA happened to have a tremendous amount of circus footage. So if I wanted a certain, in these 5 areas of the movie, if I needed something more, I would go to certain, groups. If I wanted ocean stuff, of course, I would go to Greenpeace or Sea Shepherd. to name a few. And there's just these worthy groups out there that have documented. Mercy for Animals is a tremendous organization. They've got some.
How much of the footage would you say was in the film was actually from some of these groups? Or
most of it, I would say. Okay. I shot very little because the more I tried to shoot, the more difficult it became. And I realized, same thing I did on Unity, the new film, is that this is an important point, I think. You know, I tabled any artistic desire, you know, cinemagraphically, in terms of like, I want to shoot this, I want to frame it, I want to author this shot. I sort of set that aside, and because it's so difficult to penetrate, that you almost need, if you're in another country, almost like if you're in Spain trying to get bullfighting, how am I supposed to go to Barcelona and waltz in and get this amazing footage? Whereas if I get some local activists in Madrid or in Barcelona, then they can get, you know. So I began the challenge of Earthlings was really the composition. At that point was the composition of how you're going to present it. But I let go of any, you know, artistic notion that I need to shoot it. I just didn't care anymore. Yeah, it was too difficult to do that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the stuff like with the dolphins and the slaughter there, but that just came into your possession, or?
Sometimes, let's see, that's before The Cove or some of these films that have come out more recently that preceded it. Earthlings was finished in 2005. Sometimes when I began really asking around, first it was hard. It's like, who is this guy? He's asking for footage. What does he want? I got Joaquin Phoenix to narrate it, as you know, and Joaquin had been on the rise. I met Joaquin in 2000 or 2001. He had just been nominated for his performance in a movie called Gladiator. He'd done Gladiator, and he got nominated, and suddenly he was just quite insulated. Yeah. It was thrust upon him, and he agreed to do it. He's been a vegan his whole life, and and I just thought he'd be great for it. I saw him in that movie, and he was so intense, and I thought, and I had no connection to Joaquin Phoenix. I had never met. I didn't know anybody who knew him. No. I thought he'd be good, and he wasn't available. But I persisted, and about 6 months later, you know, his publicist, it was ultimately his publicist, Sue Petricola, bless her heart, who said, fine, send over something, and I had assembled maybe 10 minutes of something. And I got a call 3 days later that Joaquin wants to meet. So I met with him, and we talked for 3 hours. He agreed to do it. And but once he was attached, is what I'm leading up to, then it became a little easier. There was sort of a legitimacy.
I see.
Once he was attached, there was a legitimacy that, this might be like a real little film. And then in answer to your question about where the footage came from, sometimes I set up a P.O. box. Sometimes it's like a brown paper bag. The tape would come in from somewhere. And after a while, you know, this is sort of scarring, as you can imagine, some of this stuff. I would get a tape. I remember I got a tape once, and it was unmarked, this tape. And it was, I think it was a mini DV tape. That was the format. And I popped it in, and there's a scene in the movie where they throw a dog into the back of a trash.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest scenes to watch.
Yeah, they just throw, I call it, the scene was life unworthy of life. You know, you just throw this, literally throwing it away.
I was punching things, and while I was watching that, I was just shaking my head.
It's very poor, it's very grainy, it's in Turkey. I think it's in the country of Turkey. And I just, you know, wept. I just sat there like weeping. I had a studio in my garage I'd built that I was cutting it in. And then, so I would get afraid every time a tape would come because I had no idea
what it would be.
But I had to look at it. I always felt like I couldn't not look. There's a quote, I forget who said it. I think it was a woman named Gretchen Weiler who worked for the Humane Society, and she said, we must not refuse with our eyes what they must endure with their bodies.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can look at a video in the comfort of my home and take a moment. But you know, as you know, people are resistant to see this kind of thing. You know, there's a hesitation to it.
You got Moby to do the soundtrack, which was, you know, a lot of those tracks I recognized from his past works. But you chose some of my favorite tracks from Moby. I'm a big Moby fan.
Yeah, me too.
And so can you tell us about that process?
Well, originally I had a classical soundtrack because I thought the imagery was so heavy, and it is. I thought you should tone it down and give this sort of gentle music. And I was naively thinking that classical music was less expensive than other music, and it turns out for anybody who's trying to score a movie, that classical music is not as expensive.
Right.
Even though they're not selling millions of units of classical CDs, but for some reason it was too expensive. And I had a friend named Libra Max, who knew Moby, and she'd seen my cut, this classical music cut, and I said, I can't use any of this music. Like, I can use maybe 2 tracks.
Right.
And I said, I can't believe it, because music, as you know, it's like surgical to go into a film and like to pull that out.
Yeah.
It's like just pulling all the plumbing out of your building. It's just, it's not easy. And she goes, what do you think about Moby? And I thought, too techno, too electric, it'll be too harsh.
Right.
She says, no, you should think about it. She became our music supervisor on the film, actually.
Oh, nice.
And sure enough, yeah, he said I'd be happy to do it. And he said, just go to my catalog, take anything you like. So,
Awesome.
so I did. I went through every Moby CD, every B-side, every import, every bootleg I could find, and I emailed him back and I said, what about all this? He's like, man, knock yourself out. So,
Awesome. Good choices.
and that's how that came to be.
So what, after the movie, what were some of the things, and you're showing the movie, you're going around, what's the reactions? What kind of repercussions?
Yeah. Well, no pushback in terms of animal welfare groups, because I never really, in terms of animal enterprises, excuse me, because I never really said, don't eat at, this restaurant, or don't do that. I just talked about the meat industry or the dairy industry or whatever. But I realized I had a problem with the film whenever I submitted to 25 film festivals and only 3 accepted it. Mm-hmm. And this included documentary film festivals. A lot of documentary, there's like just documentary festivals out there. And those were always the most painful. I'm like, wait a minute, right? I don't think this is a bad film. Mm-hmm. It's a small budget film, but why isn't this getting accepted? You got an Academy Award nominated actor, because people in Hollywood respond to that sort of thing. You have a cool, soundtrack.
Right.
And you have a good cause, why isn't this? And they were afraid to show it. One woman from, I think, a festival in New Orleans, she emailed me and she said, I'm sorry, we're afraid to show it. We have a lot of vendors here that are all sell animals or use animals. So we had a screening at CAA, the agency here in Los Angeles. We had a screening. Woody Harrelson, who was a supporter of the film, and his brother Brett, who was one of our producers, had tried to get some interest in there. Joaquin came. Dennis Hopper was there. I remember sitting next to him for that screening. And we had distributors that come. Oh, and now 5 years had passed since I had started it to the time I finished it. Okay. And Joaquin had a new film that had just come out called Walk the Line, which was this Johnny Cash biopic. Yeah. And suddenly he was nominated again. And so it was funny how this trajectory worked out. So he was, again, sort of this hot thing, because that new movie had just come out. But the distributors came. It was HBO, it was Lionsgate, it was a number of others, and they just said, you cannot release this film. You cannot release it. There's no audience for this film. And we weren't even trying to sell it to make any money. We really didn't care. I'd financed it myself. I didn't spend a lot, but I'd spent more than I had to make it. And they said, you've got to sweep it under the rug or cut it drastically. And I remember having a conversation, I think it was with HBO. I went to New York. I met with a director of documentary programming in New York. And she'd said to me, well, can you cut around this a little bit? And I said, well, how do you cut around it? Like, let's take the pigs, the pork section, for instance. How do you cut around it? We have ear clipping, we have teeth cutting, we have tail docking, we have castration. There's a lot of things that are shown, as you know. Like, how does one cut around it? And then I said, this is the documentary film. This is the non-fiction film. How much truth do you want me to cut out of this movie? And why? Why do you want me to cut out? Right. So they wouldn't touch it. So it broke me. It literally, that film bankrupted me. And I remember 2 years passed. Maybe I'm shooting ahead, but just to wrap it up, 2 years passed in the film, just no one responded to it. And then it began to pop up on the internet, just for whatever reason. People began, I think animal advocates probably were trying to show it to their family or friends, literally as small as that. And we began noticing it in different languages, which we hadn't translated. Multiple languages. We couldn't keep up on the DVD. I think we have 10 languages on the DVD right now and subtitles, but there were 40 online that we were aware of. And we found the film streaming in over 200 websites that we knew of. It had over 1 million hits on Google, another 1 million views on YouTube. And it began to sort of, same cut, same film from before, not a single change, not promoted any different, no push. maybe it was just a little ahead of its time. Something began, and today it's still, to this day, we still sell it. It's for free on our website, but people want to own a copy, they still buy it.
And where do they go to buy that? Just so we can let everybody know.
Well, they can go to Earthlings.com, or they can go to Amazon. You can get it on iTunes. You can get it pretty much anywhere now.
Well, did the film set out to do what you planned to have it do, or is
that's such a great question. Yeah.
Or is it it's still work in process?
Yeah,
work in
probably.
progress.
I mean, you hope it has a positive effect. I always ask that question with films like this, because and people will tell you, it's very film school. Don't teach, entertain. Even in docs, like just keep it going, keep it moving.
Right.
And I always thought, there's plenty of films about a number of subjects, documentaries particularly. You want to watch a film about being a roadie with the Rolling Stones, go ahead. How dinosaurs came into being a transvestite, whatever the case is, there's a million docs about it.
Yep.
That said, tell me that in the canon of documentaries there's at least one on the suffering of children or the elderly, poverty, animals, the environment, something that really just, bears it wide open in the sun and just says, look at it. So it had a slow, it's what we call a movie having an afterlife.
Right.
No one responded when it came out, but today it still seems to be okay. Yeah.
Well, are you, I assume you're a vegetarian or a vegan?
Yeah,
or, okay.
of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about, I guess, that lifestyle? Do you because of I'm assuming because of the documentary and what you've seen, I've been a vegetarian for a week now since seeing the film.
How's the transition?
It's been okay. I wasn't a heavy meat eater beforehand.
Well,
so
that makes it a little easier.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It's and I feel light. I don't know.
Right.
I've been telling you, especially yesterday, I was doing I do stunts,
right.
And I was doing stunts and stuff yesterday. I was like, wow, I just feel so light. So I don't know what that means, but anyways.
Well, you know what it means, of course, when you have a big, heavy breakfast, you feel.
Yeah, you have.
And what's amazing about that, I'm no nutritionist.
Right.
I'll be clear about that. I'm not a nutritionist, but our brains tend to think that means full.
Right.
We've become accustomed to that, not just eating enough and still being sprightly but that sort of, I gotta sit down and it's extraordinary.
Just let it. Yeah. So, where I haven't had that feel. I guess I'm grazing all day now.
Right.
Constantly eating stuff. But yeah, no, I feel great. But I was wondering but for me, I don't see, I guess, my conversion to a vegetarian diet is just because I know where how the meat was prepared and how these animals were tortured in order to produce this. And I still feel that if I were, I guess, living on my own farm and raising my own meat, and one line that keeps always going through my head is in Avatar, because of this film I worked on, when Zoe asked, she was telling Jake, you ask for the animal's permission.
Right. Right, I remember.
To kill it and to provide for. So I kind of come from that mentality. So I don't see it wrong eating animals. I just see it wrong treating them the way we treat them to raise. So do you see it that way, or how do you see the whole,
I understand. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. There was a time for centuries where I don't know, slaughterhouses go back quite far. If you read Utopia, you'll read about slaughterhouses in Utopia, and I believe that book goes back to the 1500s or so. I could be off by a century or so, but it's at least 400 or 500 years old. But mostly from the Industrial Revolution is when we began to see this massive sort of agricultural push for keeping the food close to society instead of hunting, going out and seeking it all the time, keeping it close, containing it, and so on. Now, 100 years ago, if you go back to, let's say, 1912, it's 2012 now, so you go back to 1912, and you find a medical journal from 1912, and you read it, you won't find any, if you look at the top 10 causes of death, you won't find heart disease. That's rather interesting.
Right.
Fast forward 100 years, and the number one cause of death is heart disease. Now, 100 years ago, meat was a sort of a special occasion
Right.
kind of thing. Sunday, the Sunday roast,
Yeah.
holidays, maybe a little bit on the side with your rice and vegetables, sort of not a garnish, but not a far cry from a garnish. It was expensive, and it was.
Right.
Today it's the opposite. It's bacon and eggs for breakfast, a chicken sandwich for lunch, a pizza for dinner.
Yeah.
So we've boosted it up, obviously. If one wants to live in tune with nature, kill their own animals, give a prayer, if you will, for the animal or for nature, for providing it, that's one thing. I suppose that's the hunter mentality, really.
Sure.
You know, that this is what I go get my own food. And,
Right.
but I'm sort of an advocate for no longer living by killing. Like,
Right.
no longer living by killing, just moving beyond that. And so I hope that answers the question.
Sure. So, and this kind of leads into my next question. Have you, I mean, with all of the genetically modified stuff going on with not only the fruits and vegetables and these things, which I won't go into right now because it's a whole nother subject,
Sure.
but I'm sure you've heard that they're experimenting with growing meat in labs, like slabs of chicken breast or something like this. You know, is that, what's your take on that?
Well, I'd call it frankenfood.
Yes, frankenfood, there you go.
It's frankenfood. But then again, strawberries are frankenfood. When you go to Costco or somewhere and there's these strawberries, they're just like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of strawberries, you know.
Right.
That's because that strawberry is on steroids, you know. In nature, the strawberry does not grow that large. Genetically modified, as you said. In terms of a synthetic meat or something that tastes like it, all they're trying to do is give people the sensation that they're accustomed to.
Right.
If that is a step away from actually killing a living being, who's going a living being that most people will feel is inferior.
Yeah.
You know, a chicken, a cow, and a pig is like, you know, it's not important.
Yeah.
Which we talk about in the film that you're going to see tonight. If we go to the next step about, you know, this perception for this being as opposed to this being. Like we have to save the whales.
Right.
But, you know, the chickens and the cows aren't really that important. That's sort of duality to this. And does that not mirror itself in society? I think it does. So in terms of satisfying one's taste buds, you know, give them the fake meat stuff if that helps in the transition, getting off of it. But keep in mind too, don't forget this. This is, I think, a vital point. I hope I say it with enough impact, but people don't really like meat. They think they do. They tell themselves they like meat, but no one's like eating raw flesh off the bone with the hoof still hanging out of the mouth and the fur and the horns and the guts and the blood. No one's doing it. Very few humans, unless you're some weird tribe somewhere. They want all that stuff cut away.
Yeah.
And they want their meat, all the fat cut off, and they want it rounded, and then it's full of sauces.
Yeah.
And seasons of the earth, I might add. Tastes of the earth are added back into it. So really what you're addicted to is the butter and the salt and the seasons and the flavorings. And what you're chewing on, your base, happens to be this flesh. So whenever you get a carnivorous person saying, I have to eat meat, I love my meat, it's like, I defy this person not to have barbecue sauce and salt all over their meat. And generally, there are exceptions to every rule, but that's what you're seeing. We're addicted to the flavorings of the meat. Meat's a base.
That's true.
So give them a synthetic if that's important. And if you want to do one better, just try it with tofu.
Right.
Try it with something else.
I was going to say,
it won't kill you.
Recently I went to this vegetarian restaurant in Culver City. I forgot the name, but I had a portobello burger, right, or a tofu burger or something, and I've been telling everybody this thing tastes better than any hamburger I've ever had in my life.
Why not? Yeah.
And this is before I actually decided to go vegetarian. So
that's progress.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it has that. I guess the mushroom is that kind of fleshy.
Gives you that base texture.
Kind of thing.
That's what
It tastes. It's great.
I mean, look at yourself. I don't know.
I crave that.
I don't know what I would if I was totally bare-ass naked in the woods with my stubby fingers and my no fangs. I don't know what I could catch by myself. You know, I don't know how I'd sort of tear into a deer if I managed to catch a deer or a squirrel or something. I don't know how I'd open it. Arguably, human beings are herbivores. Yeah. By our makeup, you pick a piece of fruit off the tree and eat it. You know?
Or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Fang thing kind of.
I don't know.
that-
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I don't know
yeah,
how you do it. and then when you see people walking out of Earthlings or not wanting to see any blood.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas the line is just,
Yeah.
I can't wait to go into it.
Right.
Let it sit there for a day, and vultures are picking at it, and maggots are going, doesn't care, just goes right into the crotch and just starts chomping on guts. That's a carnivore. That is a carnivorous
true.
being.
Yeah, I'll take the apple any day.
So it's just something to think about.
Well, just to wrap things up here, your next film, Unity. After getting Earthlings out there, did you? And I'm assuming, I'm just guessing here, but maybe you can help fill it in. You discovered some new things while making. Did you discover new things while making Earthlings, and which led you into Unity, and what were those things? And if you could just give us, not without spoiling Unity for everybody, but just give us a little hint on.
Well, the thing that began to nag. So I told you what nagged at me on Earthlings. I was just sort of suffering of beings and living by killing. And what nagged at me on Unity was this idea of duality. Mm-hmm. Was the fact that there would be empathy here for this, what we call expression of life. We say it a lot in the film, this term, expressions of life. These are expressions of life. And we see that nature is, we say this in the film, is multitudinous in her expression. So life is expressed as tigers and lions and mold and trees and snails and lambs and just all these beings. Life is multitudinous in her expression. So why is it that this was the sort of genesis, if you will, of Unity? Why is it we have empathy for this expression of life, but have apathy for this expression of life? What is that? What is that perception? Why is there a separation? And what I found most compelling was that 88% of the planet is religious in all combined religions. So as far as that goes, I would say that 88% of the planet is trying on some level to better themselves, live by a certain code of conduct, if you will, that's spiritual or something better. So 88%, that's quite high. Yeah. And then you have all these self-help books. Yeah. And we have wonderful 12-step programs. I mean, we have great stuff. Philosophies that are just, go to your bookstore or library. It's just incredible. And technology and all this wisdom. And despite all that, there's still empathy here, apathy there. Right. And that was the base of Unity. I thought that this is completely inconsistent. Right. When will human beings realize this duality, that we are dualistic, and how does it not mirror itself? So the whole film is this study in duality, and unfortunately, to illustrate that, is juxtaposed with a tremendous amount of disunity. Sure. Disconnection. Yeah. The words are very positive, the words are about unity, but the images are about disunity. Right. And I think that works on viewers. But you'll find, as you'll see, tonight or when others see it, that it's almost as if whatever taboos are built into us in society, coming up through society, or that we've built into ourselves, when your consciousness begins to expand, it begins to butt up against your whatever taboos you have built in, and then this is considered agonizing. This is like a problem. Like when you first become a vegetarian, that was a good, and you're like, wow, well, wait a minute, and it's your whole frame of reference, and maybe your family's going to give you a hard time, or your friends. It's extraordinary. What do they care what you eat? It shouldn't matter at all. But they do care about it. So, but you're like, well, I saw this thing, or you read a book, or whatever the case may be, and I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to. That's an ethical choice. Some people do it for health reasons, which is fine too. So this is kind of what happens. You look at this stuff, and it pushes you a little bit. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's really what Unity is about.
I guess just to wrap things up, and I don't remember the quote exactly. Maybe you can help me. There's a line in Earthlings. It talks about that wars will keep going on if we don't.
Tolstoy. Tolstoy has a quote. I think that's the one you're doing. As long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields. Yeah, that was because he's saying as long as and we take this further in Unity. That's why I think it's a sequel. Right. I consider it a sequel. Mm-hmm. As long as some group of being, some expression of life is considered inferior, it will mirror itself. I think it'll mirror itself in humanity. I think it will because Because the perception's internal. So if you think, I just don't, like I have to save the harp seals, all the harp seals, we can't be killing harp seals anymore, but you just don't care about pigs. If, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if that exists, then it's going to show up somewhere else. So until we're really willing to look at ourselves and go, why am I being inconsistent with this?
Right.
Why do I have preferential attachment here, but I'm totally indifferent there?
Right.
And then I'm going to church, I'm doing yoga, and I'm and I'm looking for peace on earth, and we want it. That's the question.
That's it. I think that wraps up.
I hope I didn't drone on too long.
No, this is great. This is great. But I'm gonna end it there because I think that's where people need to to let it sink in. Everybody, this is Conversations That Matter with Shaun Monson.
Thank you for
Thanks for coming down.
Thanks
Looking forward to seeing Unity.